Today we're going to talk about how to complete the square in order to find the solution to quadratic equations. So our goal is to know the process of completing the square. That's what I'm going to teach you so that you find solutions to quadratic equations. Well, before I teach you this process, let's talk about the other ways we know about finding solutions. First, you know that if you have a graph, the solutions to the quadratic equation are the zeros, and that's the spots where your graph will cross the x-axis. We did that first. Then we talked about how you could factor quadratics, and if you factor them and set them equal to 0, then you can solve for those two numbers. So third, today, we're going to talk about another method called completing the square. So again, we are looking for the points where your graph or your quadratic equation would touch the x-axis. But we can't always use a picture of a graph because first we may not have a graph available. Also, the numbers may not be whole numbers. So we can use a graph to estimate where they will be, but if they're not whole numbers, we really can't get that information from a graph. So then I taught you how to factor. But factoring isn't always available either. All of the ones that we did before could be factored, but there are some quadratic equations that are impossible to factor. Because remember when you factor, you define like a multiply number and an add number? Sometimes that is impossible to do. And some equations are non-factorable, but they still have zeros. They still have places they would cross the x-axis. So completing the square is another way we can find the solutions if the graph doesn't work and if factoring doesn't work. Now we have another option that we can use. So let me teach you how to complete the square. So when completing the square, there's quite a few steps involved, and these steps will make much more sense after we do a couple of them, okay? The very first thing we're going to do, step 1, we're going to put all x on the left and numbers, just numbers on their own, numbers without an x on the right. So if I look at the first equation that I have x squared plus 4x minus 12 equals 0. Well, x squared and 4x both have x's, and they're already on the left of the equation. So when I mean left and right, I mean of the equal sign. But the negative 12 is on its own without an x, so it needs to move to the right side. In order to move a minus 12, you're going to add 12. Okay, so I have x squared plus 4x equals 12, because 0 plus 12 is 12. All right, step 2, we're going to divide by a. Remember, you have ax squared plus bx plus c is the basic formula we're following. A is not written here, which means it's understood a 1. If I divide everything by positive 1, it's kind of an unnecessary step because nothing changes. So I still have x squared plus 4x equals 12. Okay? Next, we're going to build our equation. So in order to build, we're going to build a set of parentheses where you have x squared equals a number. Okay, so here's how this is going to work. And I don't really know how to write this in the steps, so listen very carefully. So we're going to build x parentheses squared equals, keep your 12. Okay? Now, in order to fill the inside of the parentheses, I need to take the b divided by 2. Okay? So 4 divided by 2 is a positive 2. Then I'm going to take the number that I had, so in this case it was a 12, and I'm going to add that number I just found, b over 2, squared. So I just found 2, and 2 squared is 4, so plus 4. Okay? All right, now let's simplify. So I have x plus 2 squared equals 16. Okay, now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. because the opposite of squaring something is to square root it. So I'm going to do this in a different color. If I square root this, I have to do it to both sides. But the square root of x plus 2 squared cancels the squared, and you have x plus 2 left over. When you square root 16, the square root technically always has two answers. You get a positive 4 or a negative 4. Because positive 4 times positive 4 is 16, but negative 4 times negative 4 is also 16. So when you take the square root of a normal number, you get the positive and negative answer of that, okay? All right, next step, step 5. We're going to solve for x. So let me come up here. I have x plus 2 equals a positive 4, and x plus 2 equals a negative 4. So I'm going to get two answers, which makes sense because we talked about how we're finding the solutions, and normally the quadratic will touch the x-axis twice. So it makes sense to get two answers. So minus 2, x equals 2, minus 2, x equals negative 6. So if you were to graph this original equation, x squared plus 4x minus 12, that would cross the x-axis at 2 and negative 6, okay? All right, example 2. First, we're going to put x on the left, numbers on the right. Numbers without an x, that is. So I need to move the 8. So I have x squared plus 6x equals negative 8. Step 2, divide by a. Well, again, my a value is 1, and we already proved earlier that if you divide by positive 1, nothing changes. So I can kind of skip that step. Step 3, we need to build our parentheses situation. So x plus b over 2 squared equals, we have negative 8 this time, plus that b over 2 that we find squared, okay? So we have x plus 6 divided by 2 is 3 equals negative 8 plus, so we found 3. Now we're going to square it. 3 squared is 9. All right, so we have x plus 3 squared equals 1. Step 4, square root both sides. So the square root of x plus 3 squared cancels the squared and leaves you x plus 3. The square root of 1 is a positive and a negative 1. So I'm going to get two answers. My first answer is when x plus 3 equals 1. My second answer is when x plus 3 equals negative 1. All right, so now we minus 3. Oh, so step 5, solve. All right, so x equals negative 2 and x equals negative 4. So if we were to graph that original quadratic, x squared plus 6x plus 8, it would cross the graph at negative 2 and at negative 4. If I factored it, I would find answers of negative 2 and negative 4, okay? Example 3. First, we want x on the left, numbers on the right. So all of my x's are already on the left, but I need to move this 1 to the right. So I have a 3x squared minus a 2x equals 0 plus 1 is 1. Step 2, divide by a. Well, in this case, a is 3. So here I can't skip that step. I really have to do it. So divide by 3, divide by 3, divide by 3. Okay, and this is where it gets a little bit nasty because you're going to have some fractions in play, but that's okay. We know how to deal with fractions. So 3 divided by 3 is a single x squared, 1 whole, minus 2/3 x equals 1/3. Okay, keep everything as fractions today. You're not going to give me any decimals, okay? All right, after you divide, then you need to build. So step 3 is we're going to build that parentheses. So we need x plus, take the b divided by 2, equals, we have a 1/3 this time, plus whatever you get when you do b divided by 2 squared. All right, so b, let me come out to the side and do a little side work. Our b value is -2/3. If I divide that by 2, that's really like multiplying it by a half. So if I find half of it, it's the same as dividing by 2. So we end up with -2 times 1 is -2. 3 times 2 is 6. Okay? But -2/6 will simplify to -1/3. Okay, so I've got x minus 1/3. So I just kept the negative with it. X minus 1/3 squared equals this 1/3 plus, now I need to take the answer I got, 1/3, and I need to square it. Okay, well, 1 squared is 1, and 3 squared is 9. So we're going to add 1/9. Okay, now simplify. So x minus 1/3 squared equals, in order to do 1/3 plus 1/9, I need to first change 1/3 into ninths. So 1/3 equals, if I want to change it to something over at 9, 3 times 3, so 1 times 3, 3/9. And 3/9 plus 1/9 is 4/9. 4/9. Okay? All right, now, step 4, square root. So I'm going to square root this side and square root this side. On the left, it's just going to cancel the square. Whoops. So I have x minus 1/3. On the right, it's going to give me a positive and negative. When you square root a fraction, you're really square rooting the top. Oops, sorry. And you're square rooting the bottom. Square root of 4 is 2, square root of 9 is 3. So positive and negative, 2/3. Okay, so let's split that into 2 so we can solve. So step 5 is solve. So I have x minus 1/3 equals positive 2/3. And I have x minus 1/3 equals negative 2/3. Okay, so we're going to add 1/3. X equals 2/3 plus 1/3 is 3/3, which is just 1 whole. So add 1/3 here. X equals negative 2/3 plus 1/3 is negative 1/3 left over. Okay, so here's a really good example of if you tried to solve this by graphing. If you put 3x squared minus 2x minus 1 on a graph, you would be able to see that it hits the 1 perfect. But you wouldn't be able to see the negative 1/3 quite so perfect. You could estimate it was maybe about that, but you wouldn't find an exact answer. It could maybe be factored, but again, this is another way to find that answer when it's not pretty. All right, example 4. Example 4, step 1, we want x's on the left, numbers with no x's on the right. So I need to move the 15. Now, you have to just pay real close attention to how your equations are set up. All of these happen to be set up the same way. But on your assignment today, you might have an x on the right that needs to move to the left. So just pay real close attention to it. I can't give you an example of every type of question that you'll see. So use these, use the ones on the odd answers, and just pay real close attention. You want x squared and x on the left, the number by itself on the right, okay? So I have 2x squared plus 11x equals negative 15. Step 2, we're going to divide by a. Our a value here is 2, so divide everything we have by 2. All right, so we have x squared plus 11/2x equals negative 15/2. All right, then you have step 3. We're going to do x plus b/2 equals the number you had plus that b/2 value squared. Okay, so Now let's go off to the side for a second. If I'm going to do 11 halves divided by 2, I'm really going to multiply by a half. So I want half of 11 over 2 is 11 over 4. Okay, so I have x squared. Oh, yeah, that's right, sorry. X plus 11 over 4 squared equals negative 15 over 2 plus. I need to take the answer I got, 11 over 4, and square it. So 11 squared is 121, 4 squared is 16. Okay, now in order to add 121 over 16 to negative 15 over 2, I need to take the negative 15 over 2 and turn it into something over 16. So to get that, I'm going to multiply by 8. Negative 15 times 8 is negative 120. So really, I'm taking positive 121 over 16 and negative 120 over 16. So negative 120 plus 121 is going to leave you with a positive 1 over 16. So you have x plus 11 over 4 squared equals 1 over 16. I'm going to square root both sides. So x plus 11 over 4 equals the positive and negative. The square root of 1 is 1. The square root of 16 is 4. Okay, so now split it up. I have x plus 11 over 4 equals, let's write this a little smaller, sorry. X plus 11 over 4 equals 1 over 4. So minus 11 over 4. You get x equals 1 minus 11 is negative 10. But that simplifies to negative 5 over 2. That's your first answer. Then x plus 11 over 4 equals negative 1 over 4 minus 11 over 4. X equals negative 1 over 4 minus 11 over 4 is negative 12 over 4, which really simplifies to negative 3. So your solutions are negative 5 over 2 and negative 3. Well, let's go back up here, my bad. After we built that, then we took the square root of both sides. Then we solved for x. Okay. All right, example 5. Example 5. If we have, now, before we go to example 5, let's think for just a second. All of the ones we just did have been square roots that simplified to whole numbers. 16, 4 and 9, square root of 1. Those are all simplified to whole numbers. But when you do the assignment today, they're not all going to simplify to whole numbers. So again, look at how I did the odd numbered answers to see how to write those. For example, if you end up with square root of 8, that's not going to give you a whole number, but you know how to simplify the square root of 8. We've worked on that all year long. So you're going to have to simplify it and then write your answer like that. So again, I can't show you an example of every type of problem you will see, but I can promise you, you know all of the math needed to simplify them, okay? All right, 2 more examples when we're done. Example 5. Step 1. We're going to put x on left, numbers on the right. So again, mine's kind of set up the same, minus the 11. So x squared plus 4x equals negative 11. And that's different than factoring. If you want to factor, you need it equal to 0. But if you want to do completing the square, you need x's on left, numbers on right. All right, step 2. We're going to divide by a. But our a in this case is 1, so we proved earlier I can skip that step. Step 3, we're going to build, we have x plus whatever b divided by 2 is, square it, equals the number you had plus this b over 2 value you found, squared. Okay, so I'm going to take x plus equals. All right, take b. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now take that answer, 2 squared, 4. So x plus 2 squared equals negative 11 plus 4 is negative 7. Okay, so now step 4 is to square root. So if I square root this side, that cancels the squared, and I have x plus 2 left, equals. We know it's going to be a positive or negative. Okay, now if I square root this side, here's the problem. We learned last class you cannot have the square root of a negative number. So you need to make it the square root of -1 and the square root of 7. The square root of -1 simplifies to I. The square root of 7 doesn't simplify. So I have I square roots of 7. Okay, so now I can take x plus 2 equals the positive I square root of 7, or x plus 2 equals the negative I square root of 7. So when you subtract 2, you get x equals -2 plus I square root 7, and over here, you get x equals -2 minus I square root 7. Okay, now, because these are exactly the same, except one is a plus and one is a minus, most of the time we'll write that as one single expression. So your answer is -2 plus or minus I square roots of 7. So mathematicians are kind of lazy, and if we can get away with writing the answer one time and include both, we were going to do that, overriding 2 of them, okay? Step 5 was solve. Okay, last example. Step 1. We want x on left, numbers on right. Okay, so I'm going to minus the 5. So I have x squared plus 4x on the left. 0 minus 5 is -5. Okay, then we have step 2, divide by a. But our a is 1, so we don't have to do it. Step 3, we're going to build x plus whatever b divided by 2 gives us squared equals the number we had plus whatever this b divided by 2 value is squared. Okay, so x plus b divided by 2, 4 divided by 2 is 2. I don't know why I did that. 2 squared is 4. So x plus 2 squared equals -1. Square root both sides. X plus 2 equals positive, negative. The square root of -1 is equal to I. That's what we learned last class. So I have x plus 2 equals I. X plus 2 equals -I. Minus the 2 from both sides. -2 plus I. -2 minus I. Again, if they're the exact same, but one's plus and one's minus, we're going to write the answer as both together. So -2 plus or minus I. Okay, so that's it for the steps. Again, I can't show you every type of example, or your notes would be like 50 minutes long. So use these examples. Oh, we didn't finish writing our steps. We took the square root, and then we solved. Okay, these steps are going to be the same every time. But what might change is your simplification of taking the square root. So when you take the square root, that might look different depending on the square you were given. Whatever square root you have, you simplify it just like you know how to simplify square roots, okay? So look at the odd examples, use this process, and you should be good. If you get caught up on the fractions or the simplifying square roots, then make sure you ask me a question. Today's assignment, you're going to submit the Canvas form. It's matching, but there's one added thing. You will not get credit for today's assignment unless you also send a picture to my Gmail account. I think I've noticed from the last test that some of you are taking the matching assignment and you're just figuring out what makes sense, and you're not watching the video and you're not really doing the work, and then your test is bad, and then it's really hard for me to know if you learned another way or if you cheated or whatever. So today you're going to do the matching assignment and you're going to submit a picture to my email, okay? All right, go for it.